Now, from now on, I'd like to announce the session 1, starting from here, impact of Web3, what's happening around the world. And first of all, the speaker is from Animoca Brands co-founder and executive chairman, Mr. Yat Sui, and he is going to discussing about the MFTs, metaverse, and the future of the internet.
My name is Yat. I'm chairman and co-founder of a company called Animoca Brands. I'm going to talk today to you about NFTs, metaverse, and why we believe it's the future of the internet. Very briefly, we started building in the space really around 2018. I'll describe that a little. Today, we have over 340 investments, but we also build companies such as like the Sandbox, Tower, Rev. We're also involved in ApeCoin, in Yuga Labs as well. The way that we think about this space is we want to share the network effect because this is built in Web3. That means that companies that we're building are also basically constructing in an open ecosystem that is known as the open metaverse, which I'll describe in later. And we were one of the earliest investors in companies like OpenSea and Axie Infinity, Decentraland, Wax, Dapper Labs, Flow, and we started actually very early with actually CryptoKitties back in 2017. I just wanted to share this slide because everyone who's paying attention to the crypto markets wants to see. You can see that the prices are obviously going up and down, but when we started our business, Bitcoin was $3,000, meaning that even in times like this, there are actually good opportunities. But the point being that the space in general, as we see it, will continue to evolve despite the volatility. So, to the meat of the conversation. Let's talk about the metaverse. Facebook calls themselves Meta, Roblox, Microsoft, everyone's talking about the metaverse. But what is the metaverse? From our perspective, the metaverse, the journey of the metaverse today really started almost 40 years ago. Maybe some of you still remember a service like CompuServe. It was like a pre-internet service. Most of you are probably too young to remember. But that was the way that we entered online for the first time. And we had a kind of pre-internet connection service where we built online communities. And that's kind of how today, in an early way, we were prepared for this moment that we are in today. This was a commercial from CompuServe in the 1980s where they talked about what you could do on CompuServe to become a travel agent, to travel to another galaxy, or to be a stock analyst. Of course, today we can do this in the internet today. But again, it's worth pointing out that this was almost 40 years ago. Now, when we look at the space today, there's 3.2 billion people who play games, almost 5 billion people in the world today. And what we do is mostly online. When you ask the question, what's the first thing we do in the morning? What is the thing we do most of the time during the day? What do we do before we go to bed? We're probably online. Even though we're physically present, our time and attention is entirely digital. We make our friends online. We meet people online. Our businesses are dependent on being online. So already digital dependence. Which comes to this question that what is in fact the true metaverse? And we think it's not this, right? Which is what Facebook would like us to think, that they are the metaverse. The reason they call themselves Meta is because they want us to talk about the metaverse and think about Facebook. But this is not the future as we see it. It is not VR, it is not AR. Let me just talk a little bit about what the metaverse we think is. And it starts with who owns the world's most valuable resource. And we think it's data. People used to think it's oil, natural resources, and maybe that's true back in the day. Those were the things that we were fighting for scarce resources. But if you think today, the most powerful companies in the world, they control our data. They are powerful because of the use of our data. And there's one difference about this resource compared to other resources in the world. It comes from us. Every single one of us is a contributor to data. We are, in fact, the creators of this valuable resource. We don't need to own land to extract this value. It comes from our time. It comes from our attention. Put another way, we all know that Facebook and Google is valuable because of our time, because of our data construct. But who owns this data? None of us here actually own it. And we also think this is valuable for one other reason. It is the most valuable resource on Earth because it is our time. We have a limited time on Earth. We only live maybe 80 years, 100 years, maybe in the future 150 years. But that's limited. It is truly scarce. It will end, and that is why it's valuable. But there is a problem today. And the problem is that we are a resource. It's a little bit like the Matrix. We're plugged in. And we are little blocks of information, which in itself doesn't mean much. But when we put this into a big machine, like Facebook or Google or Tencent, they become a network effect. And that is what makes them powerful. Because data has gravity. When you mix data together, it becomes more powerful. 20 years ago, when the internet started really with what we call Web 1, there was a lot of data, but we didn't know how to process it because the machine was too slow. If you found oil 1,000 years ago, it is not valuable either in your land because you don't have the machinery to take that oil and make it valuable, to turn it into energy. But today, of course, the machine is strong enough. And so Facebook, Google, Tencent, any big tech company in the world, Amazon, can take this and create this incredible network effect, except we don't own any of it. All of you here are using Facebook today. You are working for Facebook. You're working for Instagram. When you play a game, you're working for them. And they create the trillions of dollars of value. And we are free workers. What that means is that the world we live in today looks like this. We're living in the kingdom of Facebook, in the house of Google, house of Apple. We're dependents. Ask the question differently. What happens if your app is removed from the App Store? What happens to your identity on Facebook or Google if you are erased? Who controls the decision of whether you can exist digitally or not? We don't. No government does. They decide whether we can exist. But we also know that if we are removed from this world of sort of digital data, we lose access. We have less human rights. We have less capacity. That's the problem we exist today. You don't own your Instagram handle. You don't own your TikTok handle. They own it, and they control it on their terms of service. Which is why we come to this topic about blockchain and why we think non-fungible tokens is so important. Joey already described NFTs and blockchain, so I won't discuss this. But what we believe is that NFTs, because all the data is now a public good, controlled by the people who are owning the chain, as it were, as opposed to a centralized good in a private chain, like, say, Facebook, that now we can have the same relationship with digital assets as we have in the physical world. And we can create the same paradigms. Because an NFT is not just a container. It can contain our experiences, it can contain our value and our user stories, and we can compound on top of it, meaning that we can layer experiences on the assets as we do in the real life. My favorite example is to talk about cars. The car was invented 150 years ago, actually a little less, and back in the day, it was a horseless carriage. The idea of selling the car at the time was only as a service, as a platform. But what's happened is that today, because we have decentralized ownership of cars, we can have Uber, we can have Lyft, we can have car wash companies, we can have people who make electronics for cars, we can have people who make baby seats. All this industry is far, far greater than the sale of the car itself. And that's because we have decentralized private ownership. The fact that you can own a house is the reason a bank can give you a mortgage for 30, 40 years. The fact that you own the house is the reason why IKEA can exist. So ownership has always been the platform of growth. But in the digital world, we don't own any of this. Imagine if you were going to hire a driver in a car that was owned by Apple. Maybe I need to ask permission from Apple, and they will charge me 30%, so I can hire the driver. That's the world of the digital world that we live in. But what that means is that when we open these kind of economic frameworks of ownership, we now can do this in the digital world with NFTs. The fact that I can own a virtual sword in one game doesn't mean that I can use it in another game, but other games can choose to adopt it. They can innovate. They can create new services on top of the ownership of others. Today, you can get an NFT and you can lend it. You can mortgage it. You can pledge it because I am certain that there's ownership. I own this, therefore I can give you a service. But of course, this extends far, far beyond this, because really what this means is that we can now measure the network effect that these assets have. When you buy a car, you buy not just the utility from point A to point B. You're buying the ability to, you're buying many things. You're buying status. You're buying also with that other services that you can use this car for, because other people have created new businesses on top of that. One of the most important things about our own identity, we believe, whether it's avatars, profile pics, or whatever you call it, is social identity. Translated in your own life. For instance, what does it mean for the clothes you wear or the bags you purchase? Why do you buy them? A Birkin bag is roughly the same price as a Bored Ape. Actually, Bored Apes are more expensive today. But why do you buy it? The material of the Birkin bag is maybe less than 1% why you buy it, if at all. It's the fact that it's a social identifier. It has a network effect, maybe an invisible one. You buy the story, you buy the creativity, you buy what your friends say about it, you buy what a celebrity says about it, you buy what the community says. Why do you buy a fast car in Tokyo or a slow car? It doesn't make a difference. You can't go faster in Tokyo, but it's a social identifier. They say something about you. Now, in the digital world, this means it's completely amplified. If you ask the children, what do you want for Christmas? They probably want a skin. They probably want digital currency that they can buy because their friends value their social identity in a digital world, not in a physical one, which is the reason why NFTs and digital assets have grown the way that they do. NFTs are also a store of our culture. Again, everything we do in the physical world is also culture. The clothes we wear, the shoes we buy, is a culture. When you buy Nike or Adidas or Asics, you're buying a culture. None of those shoes make you run faster, but you have a preference. Why do you have that preference? The same applies for the digital world. But just like art as well, they have a long-lasting culture that is immutable, that cannot be removed. Whether it's worth millions of dollars, whether it's worth 10 or 20, it doesn't matter. And what happens, though, is that by buying NFTs, as you do with physical assets, you now have a tangible relationship with that community. When you are a citizen of Tokyo and you buy some property, you are also a tangible member of the community. In the same way that when you buy virtual land, you become also a tangible member of that community. That has value to you. You don't need to know everyone. You just need to know you're part of it. And you can still love that community without knowing every person. So, concluding briefly, these are some examples of what happens when you have property ownership in these assets. For instance, you have loans that you can give for these NFTs. People are making money playing games. That sounds almost crazy, or maybe a gamer's dream. For instance, what happened with Axie Infinity, where during COVID, people were basically playing this game in the Philippines, where a company called YGG actually created an Uber platform for this other game called Axie Infinity. And they could play on that game and rent their assets to the players in the Philippines because they had cash, but the players in the Philippines did not, and were basically able to then generate value from that experience, and they made money from this. But why does this work? So play to earn is interesting, and just so you know, play to earn is not only for people in the Philippines. Some people play, like our racing game with Rev, can earn sometimes up to thousands of dollars a month if they're very good at the game. A little bit like esports. But one thing to understand about gaming and blockchain gaming and play to earn is that it's really sharing the network effect that inherently gives value to the play. So every one of you here probably has played mobile games, but most of you probably has never paid for the game. Maybe you know a friend who has paid for the game, but most of you have probably not paid. 97% don't pay for their game in a mobile game. So how do these gaming companies make money? They make money from the 3%. And the gaming industry today is $180 billion. 90 billion of this is from mobile, from this free-to-play model. But what happens if all the people who are playing for free stop playing? The person who is paying will stop paying too, because he's not going to be playing against nobody. He has to compete with someone. So again, this is an example of the Web 2 example where we're spending our time freely. We're playing the game because we think it's fun. It is fun. But actually, we're working for the game. Every time we play in a game, we are in fact working for them. We're enhancing the network effect. And what happens in play-to-earn games because of blockchain, the value of that, through a token mechanism that Joey described before, distributes the value fairly across the community that's playing the game. Now, it doesn't have to be worth a lot. You maybe don't play a game because you can make money. You don't have to do that. But the fact is, you can see transparently that you are making some value, and you understand what the value of your contribution is. So I want to close with this, which is around the principles of property rights and why digital property rights is so important, as we think is the foundation of the open metaverse. All the metaverses that are in closed ecosystems we think are fake metaverses, and I'll describe why. This is too small, so you can't really read it. But this shows the top 20% of countries that have the best property rights, places like Japan, US, Hong Kong. And this is the bottom 20%, that have very low to no property rights. North Korea, Sierra Leone, not very good countries for some, you could say. And there's a correlation. Countries that have very good property rights have very high GDPs and good lifestyles, as you can see here. And the bottom 20% have very low GDPs. These are countries that we sometimes describe as developing, or actually less than developing, because they have countries that are not stable. Why is that? Because when you don't have property, you can't have innovation. When you don't have property, you can't build on top of it. How can I build a business or open a restaurant if the property I'm renting will be gone next month? You can't do it, right? You need stability. And property rights is the basis of stability and the basis of democracy. So our point is that the digital world is entirely based on no property rights. You don't own anything on Facebook. You don't own anything in the digital platform. You are renters. And by the way, if you're an app developer, they change your rules all the time. Apple changes new rules in 6 months. Facebook changes their APIs. That's no different than a country changing their law every 6 months. Oh, we change the property rights. We increase the tax. We make this change. How can you build a business sustainably and long-term when people are constantly changing the rules on you, or maybe even removing you entirely? That's why these countries don't have good GDPs. That's why the economy is low. So from our perspective, an open metaverse will be more decentralized and open. But what it does is it unlocks the capital, which is already trillions of dollars in the rental economy, to one where it unlocks to a much larger scale. So Hernando de Soto quoted this in this Realizing Property Rights. He analyzed countries that had low property rights, particularly in South America, and basically came to the conclusion that if you give property rights, not only is it better for democracy, it also unlocks dead capital. Now, by dead capital, what we mean here is that it is already economic substance that exists inside the ecosystem. When we share information, when we trade information, when we do something, there is capital that is locked, but it's dead because it can't unlock because you don't have property rights. When you give them property rights, it opens up. One example is imagining the world of the digital world like a feudal kingdom, because they are kings. And when democracy and capitalism was introduced, what happened was an unlocking of a huge new economy. Maybe the power of the central structure was reduced, but the economic growth completely exploded, which is why we're not talking about a change of 10 or 20%. We're talking about a potential change of a completely new economic framework that will grow like 1,000x over time, as it has when you think of feudal societies moving to democratic and capitalist societies today. In closing, we're moving towards a web which is entirely rental. The read-write web of Web 1 and Web 2 is one we don't own. We have free information, sure, but we don't own it. We can't capitalize on it. And it needs a framework of ownership. And this rental to ownership economics creates the reason why NFTs appear so expensive. Because because everything is rental. When you rent a house, it costs maybe a certain amount of money. You don't expect to buy that house for 1 or 2 times rent. You understand that if the property is stable, that you can pass it on to your next generation, that you can sell it if you want to. And therefore, you unlock capital that is worth 30, 40, 50 times the value of rental. That is the point of unlocking actual economic benefits. And this is what's happening with Web3. which is why a land on Sandbox can be worth $1 million, which seems almost crazy. But if the land can generate yield of even $100,000 a year, then actually it's a very high yielding instrument. And we've seen this in societies. And so the way we think of Web3 is not to think of it entirely as a business construct, as how it's efficient for your business. It helps, of course, but to think of it as the birth of a new country, of a new nation, with a new shared ownership of digital property rights. Thank you.
Mr. Xu, thank you very much. Yatta-san, ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Mr. Yat.